Alright, so in my video, I'm going to talk about preload of the heart. So preload of the heart is, we're going to go over this. So preload is the initial stretching of the cardiac myocytes, or the muscle cells prior to contraction. So it's related to ventricular filling. So essentially what it is the blood fills the ventricles, and preload is the proportional end to diastolic volume. So the more heart fills with diastole, then the more it's going to fill with systolic. So what you can look at the Frank-Starling law. So heart rate is going to increase the diastole, and the diastole is going to shorten, causing less filling time and smaller EDV and venous return. And volume is going to return to the right ventricle, and venous increases, then greater than the volume of the blood into the ventricles. So it's kind of like filling up that portion of the heart. And so what's going to increase that preload? So increased preload is going to be increased central venous pressure that can result from decreased venous compliance. So like the sympathetic activation of venous smooth muscle or increased thoracic blood volume. And it can be increased by either increased total blood volume or by venous return. It can be increased by increased skeletal muscle pump activity or effects of gravity. It also can increase ventricular compliance, which is going to be like a rubber band pulling back on the heart, which results in a greater expansion of that chamber during filling at a given filling pressure. It can increase by atrial force of contraction resulting from sympathetic stimulation of the atria, or from increased filling of the atria and therefore increased atrial contractile force through the Frank-Starling mechanism. It can also increase by if you have a reduced heart rate, again, which is going to increase that ventricular filling time. It can also increase the aortic pressure, which is going to increase the afterload of the ventricle, and that's going to reduce the stroke volume by increasing the end systolic volume, and is going to lead to secondary increase of ventricular preload. That pathological conditions such as ventricular systolic failure and valve defects such as aortic stenosis and aortic regurgitation is going to have a similar effect on the right ventricular preload. So what can decrease that preload? So things that can decrease that preload is going to be a decreased venous blood pressure, and that's most likely going to come from a reduced blood volume, like a hemorrhage, or gravity that's going to cause blood to pool in the lower limbs when standing upright, so like in your legs. That can also be caused by impaired atrial contraction that can result from atrial arrhythmia, such as atrial fibrillation, so that's going to also decrease your preload. Also, if you have an increased heart rate, such as atrial tachycardia, that's going to reduce the ventricular filling time, which is going to decrease your preload. Also, if you have a decreased ventricular afterload, that's going to enhance the forward flow or the ejection, thereby reducing the end diastolic volume and end diastolic volume secondarily. Also, if you have a ventricular diastolic failure by the ventricular hypertrophy or impaired relaxation, then you're going to have a decreased preload. Or if you have an inflow of mitral or tricuspid valve stenosis, which is going to reduce ventricular filling, that is going to also decrease your preload. There are also medications that can reduce your preload, such as ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, nitrates diuretics, or phosphodiesterase inhibitors. They end in RINONE, and those are also going to reduce your preload, which may have an effect as well. Thank you.